Let's learn about Lightroom today. And when I say Lightroom, I mean Lightroom that's available on both your laptop or desktop and on your mobile device. Not to be mistaken with Lightroom Classic, which is purely desktop based. By desktop, I mean laptop or desktop, so I'll just refer to it as desktop moving forward. But Lightroom, which allows you to sync through Adobe's Cloud to have photos on either your desktop or a mobile device like your iPad, which we'll get to later. Before I get started, just want to quickly apologize. I didn't do a video last week because with the whole lockdown stuff, I just wanted to make sure I had everything ready to be stuck in this apartment for the foreseeable future, because now the lockdown restrictions have tightened, so I can only go out to buy food, go for exercise in my local area, or go see a doctor if I become unwell, which hopefully doesn't happen. So to get right into it, let's jump in the computer. I'll show you how Lightroom looks on your desktop. And then after that, we'll get on the laptop so you can see how it looks there. But then also, most importantly, you can see how the two get synced up between them, so that if you're ever in a location that doesn't have internet, but you did want to edit a few photos to help pass some time or stay ahead of your schedule, you can see how you can do that or get ready to be able to edit them if you know you're not going to have internet available later on. So this is how Lightroom looks when you first install it onto your computer. On the left, you've got Add Photos, where you can add photos into your library that you want to edit. Learn if you would like to use some of Adobe's tutorials on how to use the Lightroom software package. Same with Discover. And then right now, all photos is empty because I haven't got any photos in here. On the top right here, you've got a bell for notifications. If you want to share any pictures once you're done editing them, any help you might need. And this is the Adobe Cloud where it's syncing. This is your editing suite here on the right side. And then at the bottom is keywords, metadata, and information about the picture itself. So to get started, here on the left, we'll go to Add Photos, and this is where you can choose to import pictures depending on where they're stored. I always like to hit Browse and actually search for the folder itself. Once you're here, you can go and look for the actual files that you need. Here we'll go to my raw files, and let's just pick out the last place I went to, which was SharkPoint. If you haven't seen the video for SharkPoint, I'll put a link up here so you guys can go watch it. You get to watch my GoPro get wiped out and also how my Rode microphone got destroyed. In this case, because Windows doesn't recognize Canon's RAW files, I generally have no idea what pictures I'm looking at. So I've got two options here. I can import everything, of which there's quite a lot of photos, or I'll just import a few of them. So let's just import some random ones. Let's go these ones. It'll show you exactly which photos you have selected and if you want to import all of them or just some of them. In this case, let's just hit Add 11 photos. So now Lightroom is going to bring all of this up. As you can see up here in the top left, it's got importing. You can see now all 11 of these photos have been imported. At the bottom here, you've got your film strip, and this shows you all your photos are. So you can quickly cycle through them because Lightroom normally imports them as either thumbnails or a smart preview, depending on what it is you want to do. And then you can choose whichever photo it is you'd like to edit on. So to edit the photos, let's come up here and we'll start with the edit panel. This is where you can edit things like your exposure, your contrast, highlights, and shadows and whatnot. As you move down the list, that's where you'll get your brush tools, your gradient tools, your red eye removers, which in this particular image, you can see there's no red eye because whilst there are people there, you can't see their eyes enough. So we'll start here with light. This is where you can now edit the exposure, the contrast, highlights, like I mentioned earlier. So exposure, it is a bit bright for my liking. Bring up the contrast a little bit. The shadows are fine, but I'd want to bring the highlights down just so those clouds come out a bit more. And here you've got the tonal curve straight away, which you can play around with and get quite a few good edits out of it. Just want to take a quick pause from this and say if you are liking this video so far, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. That will be greatly appreciated. And if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and make sure that little bell's notified. That way you get a notification every time a new video gets released. There will be more tutorials coming and more reviews as well. And then as soon as I'm allowed out to take photos, I'm bringing you guys along with me. Let's get back into Lightroom. So now that light's been edited, let's get into the color panel. This is where you can affect the white balance and the vibrance and saturation. So white balance, I'm actually quite happy with where it is. Vibrance, I do like to tweak. I'm not gonna overdo it. If you think you've overdone it, you probably have. And then saturation. And if you want to reset any of these to 0, just double click on them and it brings it back to 0. And then as you move down, you've got further effects like your texture and clarity. If you dehaze, if you did want to play around with that. Details, which sharpens your images. Optics, which is to remove chromatic aberration and lens distortion. Here, what they call geometry is what Lightroom Classic will call your transform panel. So it's exactly the same tool, it's just a different name. Here it's geometry. On your desktop on Lightroom Classic, it's transform, but it's exactly the same thing. And once you're done with this, if you move to the next one, that's where you've got your angle and crop tool. So you can hit auto, which will automatically straighten it out for you, or you can tweak it around a little bit yourself. And then if you want to crop it, if you click up here on aspect ratio and original, then you can choose the different crops. If you want a square crop, a 2:1 crop, like that. This is what I'll often use in some of my panoramas, or I'll often use this, either this or 3:1, 3:2, which is the initial crop aspect ratio, because that is the crop of the sensor on a full frame camera. Once you're done with, then further on, you've got your healing brush. As I mentioned in my editing video, where I showed you guys how I edit a photo from beginning to end, I'm not a fan of the healing brush in Lightroom because it doesn't actually heal. What it does is it clones the part you want to fix with another part of the image. Whereas in Photoshop, it uses its AI to analyze your whole image or part of it that you tell it to and fill in the gap that you want to heal based on what it's analyzing. So if you are going to use the heal brush, unless it's something very small and specific, I'd say jump into Photoshop and edit it there, because you're just going to get a much better result out of it compared to using Lightroom's. So here we are in the brush tool, and like with Lightroom Classic, I find it helps to actually see where the brush stroke is using the overlay, and then to make sure I brush the areas I want to brush first before I do any edits. That way I know I'm targeting the areas I want versus doing a little bit and then adding on. If you want to do it a different way where you brush a little part first, make the edits, and then apply that with the brush strokes to the rest of the image, it's whatever works best for you. I find brushing it first and then editing it to be the most effective way for me. But to get that overlay in, if you press O a few times, first you get Show Tool Overlay. Press it again, you've got Mask Overlay. But if you press it a third time, you get both. So if you just start brushing now, you can see how there's red showing up everywhere. Let's just do a random brush here, just of the water and these rocks. We'll leave the sky and the rocks at the foreground untouched. And now if I want, I can press O again to turn it off. But as I start playing around with my sliders, as you can see, it is going to change the image where I have brushed it. And nowhere else, the best way to show this with this exposure brush. And then if I didn't want to fix it, you can hold down the Alt key and then brush away the areas you don't need. After the brush tool, then you've got your gradients. This is the linear gradient. What's coming up next is the radial. And like with the brush tool, if you press O, first you've got the Show Tool Overlay, the Show Mask Overlay. I want to see both, because that way I know exactly which filter I'm editing and not editing the wrong one, or not editing any of them at all, I should say. So at least by having it show me both the tool and the mask overlay, I know exactly what I'm working with, and then I can edit my image accordingly. And like adding in a filter in Lightroom, you press and hold with your mouse and drag it down. How much you drag down depends how gradual it's going to be. The more narrow it is, the harder the graduation. The longer it is, or wider it is, the more gradual the graduation. And if you want to keep it absolutely perfectly flat, hold down the Shift key, and as you can see, it's now perfectly flat according to, not to the horizon, but to the image itself. So if I leave that there, this is just a random one. Press O again to turn that overlay off so I can actually see what I'm editing. And now, when I move my sliders around, you can actually see how it's affecting the image. If you did want to see it again, press O until you get the Show Tools and Mask Overlays, and then you can start dragging it up and down as needed. Press O to get rid of that, and then just start playing around with your sliders. And it's exactly the same with the radial overlay, where get it to show both of them. Draw a random radial filter, let's say it's for this rock. That's not too bad. Let's just actually make this a bit more accurate, shall we? Press O again to turn that off, and now I can start playing with my sliders and affecting just this one area only. And then here at these three dots, this is where you have a few extra options. So you can copy these settings to paste them onto other images, or you can choose particular settings that you want to copy. You can choose all of it, or you can choose just parts of it, depending on what it is you want to do. Choose copy. Let's go to this image here. Go back to this one, and you go paste. You can see it's applied all of the settings here. If you didn't want to use the mouse, you can always do Control or Command C for copy, then Control or Command V for paste. Because if you do Control C on this one, it copies everything. Not just particular edits, but all of the edits. Whereas if you wanted to be specific on it, choose Control, Shift, and C. And then it actually gives you the options of what it is you would like to choose. There are still the other options that you get with Lightroom Classic, such as your HDR and your panorama, which if you did want to do a HDR, you can select the images you would like, right click on them, go to photo merge, and then you can choose either HDR merge, panorama merge, or HDR panorama merge, which is when you have bracketed exposures of a panorama and you just want Lightroom to blend all of them together for you. There is one caveat to Lightroom I should mention over Lightroom Classic, which is that if you did want to bring it into Photoshop, you've got to do it one image at a time. So if it's a case where you wanted to do focus stacking or exposure blending manually using Photoshop, you wouldn't be able to select multiple images and then open them as layers in Photoshop. You've literally got to open one at a time and then copy and paste them into one image and make layers manually. So that is just something to bear in mind if you are planning to do that. If that is something you do quite regularly like I do, then I'd say stick with Lightroom Classic. If it's something you do occasionally and you don't mind having to do it manually, then sticking with this one is perfectly fine. If you did want to edit in Photoshop, you right click on the image you want and choose edit in Photoshop, or use the keyboard shortcut, in this case Control-Shift-E. And when you do that, it'll open Photoshop for you and it lets you know exactly what you can do there. And once you've finished all your edits, if you're ready to export it, right click on that image again, choose export, and you can choose JPEGs, original settings, previous settings. If you want complete control over how it is exported, choose export one photo, JPEG dimensions. You can choose custom size if you want. You can choose the full size, which coming out of this camera is like 6600 odd pixels. And then it gives you a few options as well. So if you wanted to put the copyright data in there, that way you can say that yes, it's your image because your name is actually baked into the file. If you want, you can change the name completely, or you can even get it ready for printing or posting to social media or your website if you choose either screen, matte, or glossy paper, and the color space that you need as well, which is much more important when it comes to the printing aspect than it is to online. If it's online, just choose sRGB, it's fine. For printing, normally we go with Adobe RGB. And when you're ready, just hit export and it'll let you choose exactly where you want to save it. Hit select folder and off it goes. So that's Lightroom on the desktop for you. If you have noticed, up here on the top right, you've got the cloud and it's saying that it's syncing. So right now, Lightroom is actually syncing all of these images and these edits to my account in Adobe's Cloud. But then I've also had my iPad open and syncing at the same time throughout this as well. So right now, if I open up the iPad and went into Lightroom, you'll be able to see not just these photos, but this edited photo as well. So we'll do that right now. Let's jump on the iPad. All right, and here, as you can see, I've got all the same editing options that I did on the desktop. I've got the light, so I can tweak the exposure and the contrast. As I mentioned, you can just use your finger. You don't need the Apple Pencil for this. You've got the highlights, the shadows. So I'm not doing a proper edit. I'm just showing you how you can actually use your finger to edit everything. But if you wanted to be able to edit on your iPad in a location where the internet may not be so stable, or you don't have free Wi-Fi, or any Wi-Fi, I should say, what you have to do is on each edit, you have to go up here to the cloud and choose get this original, because in that way what it'll do is it'll actually download that file onto your iPad so you can work on it offline. So right now, as you can see, it's done. So if I put this in airplane mode, so now there's no internet connection here, I can now edit this particular image the way I would like. That's a bit too dark. Whereas on this picture, this one hasn't been downloaded from the cloud. So as you can see here on the right, I can't make any edits. All right, I would have to connect to the internet, download the actual image, not just the smart preview, but the actual image onto the iPad, and then I'm able to edit it. So if I turn airplane mode off and then select get this photo, and now you can see I'm able to edit this photo because I'm not just connected to the internet, but I also have this photo downloaded. So if I put this back in airplane mode, you can see I can now edit this photo, but the next few images I'm unable to edit because I haven't downloaded them onto the iPad. So that's Lightroom on both the iPad and the desktop. Whether you use one or the other or both, or if you're like me and you want to stick with Lightroom Classic, it's whatever works best for you. I mean, if you're happy with the way this works and you want to be able to have the mobility of editing on both a desktop and an iPad, I'd say stick with this one. Because I do a lot of editing with exposure blending in there, because if there's a high dynamic range area from dark shadows to a bright sky, and I want to make sure it's balanced properly, I would find myself that it's just a lot easier to do all of that in Lightroom Classic and then bring it all into Photoshop as layers versus having to do it manually. So for me, I would actually stay with Lightroom Classic. But if this is something that you would prefer using over Lightroom Classic because of that mobility function, then use this version instead of Lightroom Classic. which one you use depends on what your end goal is at the end of the day. But if you want to edit the occasional photo and you're not going to be using up the full amount of storage that you've got in Adobe's Cloud, then this is a perfectly good piece of software to be able to take with you, where the edits are synced between both your iPad and your laptop, so you know exactly where it is at any given point, provided it's all synced properly. But then that way you can also even take your iPad and go edit it on the sofa if you like. I'll leave it there for today, because I know otherwise I will start rambling in 50 million directions, as we all know I have a tendency to do. If you have liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up. It does help the YouTube algorithm out quite a bit. And if you want to make sure you stay up to date for future videos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and make sure that bell ticked, so that way you get a notification every time a new video comes out. I do want to quickly apologize, I didn't do a video last week, but with all the craziness going on with the lockdown, I just needed that week off to just center myself and make sure that I could put together a quality video for you guys, instead of try and rush it through because I wanted to get a video out. But in saying that, because we're now in lockdown, I am able to spend more time creating videos for you. So hopefully this one will be better than the previous ones, and the future videos will improve as well. See, I've just gone in 50 million directions. So I'll stop it there for now. Stop it there for now, to now. I'll stop it there for now, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good night.